Thank you, Susan. I'm here to introduce our speaker for Adam and Eve, and Linda Wolver DeVelder received a bachelor's degree from Hope College, and she also earned her master's degree and PhD from the University of Chicago. And she taught at various colleges, and the most recent one is University of Cincinnati, the Claremont College, and she retired from there fairly recently. Well, welcome, Linda. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. And I want everyone to know, I want to welcome everyone and tell you that I prepared for today. So you have to appreciate how I prepared for an adventure in the Garden of Eden. These are my glasses. And this is my sweatshirt. I pulled out a Cincinnati Zoo sweatshirt with zebras on it. But we'll see what some of the representations of the Garden of Eden have been in the past. And we'll watch how Mark Twain is going to create for us an imaginary American Garden of Eden, and playing off the story that we find in the Bible, he's going to give us a comic adventure with twists and turns. Now, it would be easy if you got in the right mood for just about anybody to start a comic adventure with Adam and Eve. Like if I gave you a line for Adam that says, "Beans again," and you're supposed to start a dialogue between Adam and Eve that starts with "beans again," what would she say next? Well, any of a million things, and then you would just start playing it out. You would be doing kind of a takeoff or a mock Adam and Eve conversation that, if it was good, would end up as stand-up comedy or a little drama or something. Mark Twain is going to do the same thing with genius and with comic genius. And he's going to do it in a kind of American way. Now, the fact that he did it in 1904, you have to take your mind back to the world of 1904, the beginning of the 20th century, and trying to create Ur-man and Ur-woman, the originals of man and woman, as seen at the very beginning of the 20th century. So what was America like in the beginning of the 20th century, and what elements is Mark Twain going to use? Let's see now. Okay, there, I have to have that on there. Now how can I advance it now? All right. So here's the original cover of his book and a picture of Mark Twain. Mark Twain was born in 1835 and he died in 1911. And shortly before he writes the Diaries of Adam and Eve, his wife, Livy, died, his beloved wife, and apparently they were very happy. And so this is late in his career. Huckleberry Finn is behind him, Tom Sawyer is behind him, and he's writing this at a time in his life when he's living in Hartford. I believe he's living in the Hartford, Connecticut area. And as you can see from the cover of this book, it's fairly daring for a book of 1904, and we'll get back to that when we get later in the PowerPoint, because illustrations did accompany his book, and we're going to share some of those with you as we go along. Now, thinking about male characteristics and female characteristics that he's going to play off of, that all of the great comedians of the past play off of, classic male and female so-called, in quotes, characteristics. So let's run through some of these that we might find and see to what extent Mark Twain is going to use it or turn it upside down. We'll see if Eve is more curious and sensitive to beauty than Adam. We'll see, is she less rational than Adam, or at times is she more rational or logical than Adam? Is she the weakling? Does she need protection and advice? Or is Mark Twain giving us a somewhat more American Eve who thinks of herself with a little more confidence by this time? We'll be very interested in seeing how Mark Twain is playing them off of each other. Does Adam get to be the man who mansplains things? Is Eve self-confident? Does she see his mistakes and foibles and hasty moves? Is she more oriented to the future, to the big picture? Is she, in a word, more philosophical than Adam is? Or is he more philosophical? And what would we predict just from the stereotypes that people have about this? Usually we think of, in 1904, all of the college teaching positions were held by men. If a woman strayed onto a college faculty, it might be because she was so good at music or possibly art. But taking just Hope College as one tiny example, there were practically no women on the faculty at all for a very long time after 1904. So is the woman more wordy and expressive? Is she emotional? Is she given to hysterics? Did you know that hyster is the Greek word for womb? And so from where hysterics comes from, it was automatically associated only with women. Only women get hysterical in most uses of the word. Is she excessively talkative? We know from science today that in fact, women do talk more than men in an average day. Does she have to bring Adam out of his shell? And then a key question that the theologians had discussed for generations, is she more to blame for the fall of man than Adam was? So let's hold that in abeyance. And as we go through our discussion, and when you have thoughts about this, we'll feel free to bring it up. Now, here are just a couple of classic illustrations of Adam and Eve that predate 1904. And it seems to be an opportunity for artists to test their skill in showing a nude picture while having a very holy subject. And some of them are quite Michelangelo-like and like classic art. And then there's a bit of folk art there with Adam and Eve and the tree. Here's a very dramatic image from the Baroque era of the angel expelling Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, clothed, of course, and there's a serpent there, and there's great wind and great turbulence and great drama. It's not static at all. Now, we might think that the Garden of Eden would be a calm and quiet place of peace and serenity, but where is Mark Twain going to take us for our American Garden of Eden? If we look on, where are we in this whole story?
Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like.
In the very, the whole extract from Adam's diary starts off with a Monday, and he's commenting on this new creature, which of course is Eve, the new creature with the long hair. And then the very next entry says, Tuesday, been examining the great waterfall. It is the finest thing on the estate, I think. The new creature calls it Niagara Falls. Why? I am sure I do not know. Says it looks like Niagara Falls. So we find out right away at the beginning that Twain is placing Adam and Eve in the park around Niagara Falls. And before he even has been on the stage for a moment, we find out that he is, well, we're going to find out soon that he likes to jump off of Niagara Falls. So it's beautiful, it's natural, and Twain is going to make use of Niagara Falls. Now we're going to go back to the Genesis story for just a minute, because although most of us are, familiar with this and have maybe even studied it from time to time, the original story is told a little is told in a very interesting way. And because Twain is going to manipulate some of these things and some of the key questions about what is the nature of the Adam and Eve story exactly as it was told in the original Hebrew in the oldest texts. The word Hebrew, Adam means earthling. That has no gender in Hebrew, or in the English word, earthling doesn't indicate man or woman from the word. So earthling and the original Hebrew word are similar in that they are not gendered. The Hebrew only switches to a gendered word for man after the creation of Eve. So in the text, after God creates Adam and Eve in Genesis 2, then the word referring to man switches to a male word that does have gender. To say that woman was created from man is complicated, therefore, by a little different treatment in the original language. Man, female from male is not correct in the language of the text. And in Genesis 1, 26 and 27. So Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 27, in other words, the story of the 7 days in which God creates the earth. It says God created humankind. And here, what I circulated to you is the New Revised Standard version of the Bible, based on the King James, but more up to date in its scholarship about the Hebrew that's used. So in Genesis 1, chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, you'll find God creates humankind, again, an unsexed and ungendered word, and the plural is used. He created them, meaning male and female, while verse 27 adds, so God created humankind in his image, in the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And that has that beautiful poetic sound of the real poetry that this is. So, is that the way Mark Twain would have read it? Probably no, because the King James Bible has it somewhat differently, but man in that text, in the King James, does also mean a generic mankind. You can use man as mankind going way back in the English language. So you're not automatically giving the male sex to a word just because of saying man, if the context means mankind. The King James was translated in 1611. So the language of that time is reflecting 17th century English. And at that time, man did have a general meaning. So will Twain treat Eve as derivative or secondary to man? Or will he pick up the idea that both are the same in the image of God together? Yes, but what about the rib story? So since she came from his rib, how does that influence the portrayal in the original story? Well, that second creation story found in the 2nd chapter of Genesis is from another source text than the oldest manuscripts of chapter 1. And yes, man was created from dust. That's why the term means earthling in English, and the Hebrew just the same, contains the word for dust or earth or ground. And God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Translators used being, creature, humankind, mankind. Okay, man is here again, mankind or earthling, not yet a living being before he receives the breath of God. And the first earthling is the earthly form of the living being who is given the breath of God. Now comes a tale in 3 restless scenes. The tale is not at rest. In Genesis 1, as you probably recall, you have the 7 days, and God created light, and then he creates light, and he saw what he had created, and he said it was good. Next step, he creates, the next thing, and God saw what he has made, and he says it's very good. And through each day, he gives his blessing and says it's very good to each stage of creation. So there's a kind of stability and restfulness. There's great power and creation in Genesis 1, but this second story is set up a different way. Okay, in the second tale, God first makes trees. He makes man, and then he makes trees, placing in the middle of the Garden of Eden trees which are both food and beauty, and then the mysterious tree of life, and nearby the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There seem, therefore, to be two trees with special significance. And of course, the tree of life is figured forth in many, many works of art, quilts and art forms. Back where we saw the tree a couple of slides ago, where there were two men in the tree, that could be the tree of life, or it could be the tree of the knowledge and good and evil. But in Genesis, they're two separate trees. This is mysterious because by this time, God has already created an earthling and given it life, and also breathed into it the breath of God, which must signal a spiritual life. But as yet, there are no animals. Notice that if you take this one literally, then man was first and animals were next, not the order used in Genesis 1. Much ink was spent reconciling these two stories. Now we're going to see the river, the forbidden tree, and then in the day that you eat it, you shall die, the famous forbidden tree, and then the word help, helper. Now, animals were created one by one out of the ground in the second story, and not in the order mentioned in Genesis 1. And man's dominion over the animals is enacted by the act of man naming the animals before Eve is going to enter the story. Remember that, because we're coming back to it. And then it says, but for the man, there was not found any and help meet to his need, M-E-T-E. And now we're quoting the King James Bible from what's still sort of connected to Middle English. We don't use meat very much anymore, like M-E-T-E, not M-E-A-T, and not a meat like a sports meat, but help meet. But this meat is related to meter or measure. There was not found and help measured to his need, or equal to his need, or matched to the depth of his need. This is the way the older texts coming from Middle English in the translation to modern were reflecting what the scholars found in the Hebrew. English words were feeding into the King James Version, read using help as a noun, and help, and not helper, which in English means a subordinate. The minute you say helper, it means your assistant, possibly your employee, your subordinate, the one you tell to step and fetch it. I need my glasses, I need my slipper, I need my supper. Now we're going to look at help the way it was coming into English in the King James Version from another tradition. How about our God, our help in ages past? Is help there a subordinate? And oh no. Our help is in the name of the Lord, is the votum in the beginning of many worship services. Is this old use of help a servant or a subordinate? No, it's the opposite. In Vienna, there's a street called Marie-Hilfe-Strasse. That's Marie, like Mary, the mother of God. Helfa means help, and street. Our helper, Mary Street, was Mary considered a help like a subordinate? No, she was considered a go-between to God in the old Catholic imagination. How about the song, Noel, 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 sing we clear, hope in our all folk on earth, born is God's son so dear. There's that hopen word, Middle English, helped are all folk on earth, because born is God's son so dear. Here, this indicates Jesus is the helper, the salvation, the maker of wholeness, the bringer of joy and perfection. So in this story, animals did not meet man's needs. They didn't have the spiritual qualities required to meet and measure to the needs of the man being. God tried with the animals, and after all, animals are cute. They're beautiful, they're cuddly, and you can train them to do tricks, and you can train animals to do a lot of work. And some people say the dog is man's best friend. but not in this story. For the man there was not found a helper as his partner. That's the way the New Revised Standard phrases it. It uses helper, which I say doesn't capture the right mood, and partner isn't quite there either. I think we've arrived at a lame phrase. I also think the translators in the King James Version in 1611 were worried about this too, because they knew what the Hebrew meant, and they were worried that English wasn't up to it. The man is naming and naming and naming, and the animals are amazing, but none of them meet the needs mentioned in verse 18. It is not good for man to be alone. Mankind to be alone. The animals are his subordinates. Some are majestic and some cute and cuddly, some able to be trained and fetch things, but his need is not met. Now, the King James translators answered this problem by inventing a word that had not existed before in English. They hardly ever did this in the whole Bible, but this one time they did it because they thought it was necessary. There was not found an helpmeet to his needs, a being fitted perfectly to the depth and significance. So the King James translators put helpmeet as a hyphenated word, a helpmeet to his needs. Well, I don't know if they hyphenated, excuse me, I'm not sure they hyphenated, but gradually it became hyphenated. Now hang on a minute and let's talk about the rib. God takes the rib from his side. This side is symmetrical, not his head and not his foot. Some creation myths have a God create something from out of the head. Somebody sprang full blown from the head of Zeus. I forget who it was, never mind. And not the foot. Some old creation myths create another god or creature from the foot of a god. But this one, the Hebrew one, is going to come from alongside, remember the rib, and think about how crucial the ribs are to breathing. The ribs create breathing. So breathing and breath, and hence the soul. So rib points to, I think, breath, therefore spirit and soul. And as we all know, in the Latin, spirit, the word for spirit and breath are linguistically related. Okay, so while the King James translators found it necessary and wise to create a new English word, helpmeet to his needs, to fill that need for the right word, here comes helpmeet. Soon that became helpmate. Lose the hyphen and call it just one word, a helpmate. Now we've probably run into the word helpmate in reading now and then, like classmate or shipmate, which is still a kind of equality, but soon, alas, they lapsed into the idea that a helpmate was a helper in the same way a dog is a step and fetch it or can be trained as a subordinate being to serve its master. English failed the original Hebrew richness in this last step into helpmate, which is a bit upgraded to partner, but still not quite the tremendous richness of the Middle English holier use of helper for a savior rescue. But now the idea is she's now helpmate has come to the idea that she's to serve him as her head or her master because she's the helper and he's the one who gives directions. Now watch the church fathers closely. Church fathers in the Middle Ages had already decided that the whole fall thing was the woman's fault. They went on and on about it. To get there, they began arguing that the whole story happened in a way not found in this text and also not found in Mark Twain. That is that when the serpent tempted Eve, Adam wasn't there. Notice that in this story, as we find it, the names Adam and Eve are not used. Those names come into Genesis later. But when Eve yielded to temptation, was Adam right there? Genesis 3:5 says that the man was right there. Yes, the serpent is talking only to the woman in Genesis 3:1-4. But this ambivalence was seized upon by the church fathers so that the commentators start saying that Eve was tempted because she's the weaker one, and Adam had let her go off alone by herself, forgetting about his obligation as supervisor, and Twain skips that detail. And so did the Genesis story. The Genesis story does not say that Adam was not there when the serpent tempted Eve. Okay, so let's see what happens next in that second story. Verses 8 through 11 in Genesis 3 have a common element right there. So when Twain plays with this story, he's playing with humor that's already there in the story. And let's see where it is. God amusingly says, Adam, where are you? Adam, where art thou? When God must already know exactly where Adam is. Then Adam tells a lie. He says that he hid because he was naked. In fact, he hid because he ate the apple. God nails him immediately. God is not fooled. Did you eat the apple? And then at the same time, God says, who told you that you were naked? Now Adam evades the question. First he lied, and now he's going to duck the question. He doesn't say yes. He has two scapegoats in mind. He says, the woman gave it to me, but that's not all. He says, the woman you gave me gave it to me. So now he's blaming God and Eve, not himself. Nice try, Adam. It's comical, and that does not take away from the power at all. It's human nature. The minute he's eaten the apple, he starts using scapegoats, lying, shaming and blaming, and not blaming himself, and all the things we know to be part of this story. God does not give the woman a pass as if she's only a child or underling. She is equally confronted. She truthfully says, the serpent tempted me. So God delivers consequences to all three. He curses the serpent first, then he curses man and woman equally using a pun. In Hebrew, that pun swings on the word for labor, just exactly as it's going to in English, because we use labor for childbirth labor and for labor in the field. So man and woman equally are punished, man with the labor in the field and woman with increased pain in childbirth. As if both are, but the fact that they're parallel and equally punished indicates they are equally moral agents, each having a will and each having equal moral responsibility. Okay, so a good comic piece on a known myth takes details and works with the known original, and it has to be worth the trip. Otherwise, it's only cute. So how will Twain work with more than just start with, are we having beans again, and then go through a comic dialogue there to make something cute out of it? What is he going to do to tap into something that's more, in a way, more comical, more sustained, more of a comical or ironic idea? He's also going to be pulling on the idea that anytime you have a clueless creature trying to figure out a new world, it's funny. If somebody describes just human behavior where someone's got to figure something out, it engenders humor. Domestic comedy in the English tradition is also very well established by the time Twain is writing this. Chaucer, a humorist, the Canterbury Tales are hilarious and have many comical figures in them and exchanges. Shakespeare, as we know, has a whole bunch of romantic comedies and can be very, very funny, and uses pratfall comedy and corny jokes, and Shakespeare's bawdy lines are really funny. So Shakespeare had done a lot with comedy, and so had a lot of other people in the English and American tradition. The line from Shakespeare is, the course of true love never did run smooth. That's iambic pentameter right out of Shakespeare. And it's the key to every romantic comedy plot. So Twain delivers a human comedy that will last in time, knowing that the Bible story itself contained comic ideas and still is poignant and touching in 2021 as much as it was in 1904. Now, I want to introduce another tradition that came about surrounding Paradise Lost and everything connected with the fall of man. How many have you, well, back to that Christmas song, Noel, 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 Noel sing we clear, hope in our all folk on earth, born is God's son so dear. That the story of salvation in the New Testament is the redeems what went wrong in the first place. So there's a whole tradition of the blessed apple. Blessed is the apple that was taken, because Deo gratias, it brought about all the rest that God did later. All was for the apple taken was Deo gratias. That is the ending of Paradise Lost. Now, is Twain also going to give this story a happy ending where the loss of paradise actually becomes something beautiful or a blessing? Now, Twain is not your Sunday school teacher, and everybody in his audience knows that Twain, what to expect from Mark Twain by 1904. Ever since 1835, he's been traveling, not 1835, ever since about 1870 or so, he's been traveling around the country, giving these hilarious comic lectures. And he's written Huckleberry Finn and Mark Twain. And so everyone knows what to expect from Mark Twain. I'd like to hear if there are any comments or questions at this point from what I've just been through.
Be sure to unmute yourself.
There is a question from, has virtual classroom to me. Is the PowerPoint clear for you? Someone reported that it is blurry, but is it clear on my computer? What does that mean? Anybody could explain? Maybe.
Oh, that, you know what, that was from, sorry, I'm multitasking. Jane Lindemuth said that that she was experiencing blurriness on her screen. And so, Wally, I was just checking in with you to see if you were experiencing the same thing.
Oh, no, I could see everything pretty clear.
Okay, I think then it is probably an internet issue on end of Jane, but hopefully it's been resolved. So there's nothing else in the chat that I see.
Okay, we'll keep right on going then, because now we're at Mark Twain himself. Here's another image of Mark Twain in his older age. Chaucer is gone. Shakespeare is dead, and I'm not feeling so well myself. That occurs in a moment in the Hal Holbrook An Evening with Mark Twain. And if you listen to that whole recording, which we sent you a link for it, and I guess you just got it last night, so you'll have time this coming week to listen to parts of that. And we suggested a section that you might want to listen to, but that's just an example of a comic sequence. Chaucer is gone, Shakespeare is dead, and I'm not feeling so well myself. Twain is going to draw on, of course, a lot of traditions that are already there in both English and American literature by the time he's writing. And one of them I want to call attention to is burlesque. Now, I know you probably connect the idea of burlesque with a saucy show of disrobing in Paris nightclubs, or even, yes, in the United States. But burlesque came from the name, a burla is an Italian tale that is comic and exaggerated and has a satire or mock form to it. So that's one tradition. The ingenue is a literary type pointing to just a clueless person, is just an innocent person in a strange place. The nagging wife is a comic type, especially nagging wife with the spouse. I mean, think Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. I don't know if she's a nag, but it's certainly domestic comedy. And Archie Bunker and all the comics that we've remembered from radio and television days. There are certainly elements of burlesque and grotesque in Poe and Hawthorne's characters many times. Of course, again, Shakespeare with his many, many variations of comedy, putting together a huge romantic comedy repertoire. Mistakes compounded. The clue to comedy is often every time you try to, whatever you try to do to fix a mistake, that makes it worse. So it's more funny if the fix made it worse. And comedy is larded with grandiose language for a humble subject. Now let's turn to a child. Let's just imagine a child who doesn't know what a fork is, taking it up. What makes it comical? So first we imagine this little baby in his high chair looking at a fork, and first he tries it as a comb. Okay, that is logical because the tines on the fork remind him of a comb. So he tries to use it as a comb. It's logical for the baby, but it's funny to us. So that combination of logic and surprise is funny. Now he's told to spear it with food, spear food with it. So he holds on to the tines and stabs it with the handle, takes up the whole thing like a hamburger and bun together, chomp. Well, he did what his mother said, but he got it wrong because he's not familiar. He doesn't know what she means. So the directions that misinterpreting the directions is another source of comedy. So she tells him to take smaller bites and use the other end. So he turns it around. So then he goes through pushing food, trying to hold a grape on it, tines fall off. You can just imagine this happening in your own kitchen with your own child. And by the time the child tries to spear the tomato, you're falling off your chair laughing at the unhappy consequences of a baby trying to use a fork. Still can't use it. So sooner or later, you're going to give him a spoon, he said, because the fork is actually too high tech for this child. The combination of actions and verbal directions and things misinterpreted make comedy. It's in a way comic because all the actions are logical, given the words used and what the child thought they meant or referred to. The child shows intelligence and ability to experiment. Now, the key word is experiment, because that's going to come into the Adam and Eve story. We're going to see Eve put dead fish into the bed for Adam to sleep with, not as a joke, but because she's just an experimenter. She's always experimenting. Comedy has a cumulative effect. Mark Twain doesn't just stand up and tell a series of jokes, but he actually weaves them together in a building effect, like a shtick, like a story that keeps getting funnier as each line adds to the last laugh. It's a series of laugh lines, and as you listen to the Hal Holbrook recording, you're going to hear him use pauses so effectively to wait for the laugh. Sometimes he gets it, sometimes he doesn't, but wait for the laugh, and then the next line builds, twists it again, and then the next line, same idea, and he twists it again. I'm reminding you of any other figures besides Lucy and Desi, or I Remember Mama, that old television series, Archie Bunker and Alice. Think about whether you think Alice is more subjugated than Lucy. Are both Alice and Lucy fighting for a place that they don't have? They're just kind of resist their husbands a little bit? Or is it comedy that's amusing because underneath it all, Lucy and Desi really do love each other? Do we agree on that? We have a picture of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz in the comic sequences. They really are in love. It's just that they have all these funny predicaments. Now, major English authors, as we said, Chaucer and Shakespeare, had already exploited domestic comedy and man-woman playing off of the charming and funny features of the interchanges of men and women. Shakespeare, in many of his comedies, Othello, Desdemona, Romeo and Juliet, those all were written, in the 1590s. So they're way before Twain. And in Twain's time, anybody who had even a high school education had read Shakespeare pretty much. And they didn't have Cliff's Notes either. Even good old Rip Van Winkle. Why did Rip Van Winkle go up to sleep in the mountains for 20 years? Because he had a nagging wife. So even Washington Irving uses the nagging wife to motivate Rip Van Winkle to take his keg of rum and go up for the mountains and lose 20 years. And the British example would be the social climber, what's her name? And her husband is very meek. And that's a lot of people like that British comedy.
That's Hyacinth and Richard.
Hyacinth and Richard. Yeah. And once you know the characters, the things that you're expecting she's going to approach every situation as a social climber. So we know what she is. It's that we know what to expect. So it's like a cumulative effect of comedy. Now we're going to look at also the art of the sentence. Which of these two sentences is Twain and which one is a less talented comic writer? Now this is talking about how their baby. Eventually Adam and Eve have a baby, but of course they don't even know what a baby is. So they're experiencing a baby for this first time. And for a long time, Adam thinks that the baby is a kangaroo and just is observing it, where Eve is acting more like a mother. But these are comments from Adam about how this animal, he thinks the baby is an animal. Yet it differs from the other four-legged animals in that its forelegs are unusually short. Consequently, this causes the main part of its person to stick up uncomfortably high in the air, and this is not attractive, says Adam. Here's another way to say that. This animal's forelegs are shorter than its hind legs, which raises its rump higher than its head, and that's awkward and silly. Which one of these is more comic?
The first one.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it's hard to catch unless you have the tone of the whole thing going on, but the first one is Adam's diction and his rhythms and the way it's expressed so that you follow the sentence. It takes longer to play out, but you get this picture by the end. So this is a sentence of Eve, and look how long it is. And she's trying to throw clods of mud at the stars because she wants to catch one. Even when I aimed at the one I wasn't after, I couldn't hit the other one, though I did make some close shots, for I saw a black blot of the clod sail right into the midst of the golden clusters 40 or 50 times, just barely missing them. And if I could have held out just a little longer, maybe I could have got one. That's a Twain sentence. It has 65 words. So what do we notice about this? It's breathy. I read this to my brother, and he said, she sounds like a valley girl. Okay, what's a valley girl? Do we people in Michigan know what a valley girl is? Out in California, they call somebody from Southern California who's just sort of an airhead, very breathy and kind of really off the wall. And that's what my brother, that's the feeling he got from this sentence. And if you look at Eve's speeches, she says, I. Everything is I. Whereas Adam is going to omit the word I a lot of the time. He's going to say, cloudy today, went and looked at the falls, but didn't jump today because it's too cold. Not I went. So he's. Now, the other thing I want to point out about this sentence and every other sentence you're going to find, I think, in the whole thing, it is totally grammatical. This thing at 65 words is not a run-on sentence grammatically. Your English teacher could not find a single fault with the grammar of this sentence. And I think especially if people are good readers, if an actress could do this, easy to read dramatically, and it shows a master of long sentences that have build and drama of their own. And this is illustrating that style I'm calling a burlesque style, a style of exaggeration and playing it out. A creative writing teacher, creative writing 101, write tightly, would write it over like this. I tried over and over to hit it, and once I almost did. A clod sailed right into a golden cluster several times. I could have gotten one if I'd persevered. Same idea, but it's not comedy. Well, maybe you would be mildly amused. But
Linda?
Yeah.
The story has it that Hemingway, when he wrote The Old Man and the Sea, he sat down and wrote the entire work at one time.
Yep.
If you look at the style for Mark Twain, is his writing just one long paragraph that he's kind of a thought that he's had at one time, similar to Hemingway, or is it kind of disjointed where he just kind of, like when you listen to the video that we listened to for today's class, it is a little disjointed, but he's telling one long story.
Yes. I think that in that video, you do see segments that you could believe or imagine he wrote at one time. I believe that when someone is writing in this burlesque style, it's kind of a, you get into that mood, you get into that zone or voice that would be the old man in the sea. And it carries you along so that the whole thing comes out in a voice. I do think that he wrote the Diary of Adam and Eve over a short period of time, captured the voice. And by this time in his life, he's very used to that process of getting into a zone and playing it out. I don't know the details of, I don't think I've read about the details, if we know any about how he wrote this, but it certainly has unity of style. And I think that's when you, if you have the time, that whole Hal Holbrook thing is an hour and 45 minutes. So I would never, expect you to do the whole thing at once. But if you have the time, it does break into a first half and second half about in the middle. And it would be maybe fun for you to, especially gather another one or two people to watch it with you. Watch the first half and enjoy that, chew it over a little bit, and then watch the second half and see what he does. He takes a long section from Huckleberry Finn in the second half, but in other cases, he's spinning out a single theme, and that seems to have unity, like the idea of looking at the stars. Now, Adam is going to get to a point in this story where he thinks his own son is a kangaroo. Another long sentence. But I caught a true kangaroo. Well, you see how high the rear end is and the head is low? Well, he goes from the crawling image where he crawls along and his butt is way up in the air because his hands are down on his hands. And then he goes from that to the kangaroo. But I caught a true kangaroo and brought it in, thinking that this one, meaning his baby, being lonesome, would rather have that for company than have no kin at all, or any animal it could feel a nearness to or get sympathy from in its forlorn condition here among the strangers who do not know its ways or habits, or what to do to make it feel that it is among friends. But that was a mistake. It went into such fits at the sight of the kangaroo that I was convinced that it had never seen one before. Now, I think this is a laugh sentence, but I also think it's profound because within this comment that he brings his little baby, a baby kangaroo, to play with because he thinks the baby is a kangaroo. But the baby knows that it's not a kangaroo. That's what I think. The minute Eve comes into the world, when we see her appearance portrayed, the minute she comes into the world, she knows that she is the same being as Adam. Now, when Eve is created from the rib, this is the first time we hear Adam say anything in the Genesis story. And what does Adam say? Well, this isn't a quiz, so I'll tell you. This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, he says. So he sees the equality, the identity of being. A human being knows another human being. And this is suggesting that a kangaroo knows a kangaroo, and even a baby knows that a baby is not a kangaroo. The baby knows that it is connected to humans, not kangaroos. But Adam hasn't figured this out yet. But Adam and Eve recognize each other's humanity right from the elements of this. Now, another element of the Garden of Eden story is that the assumption is that since the fall of man traditionally was believed to bring death into the world for the first time, the church fathers and many other theologians assumed that that meant that in the Garden of Eden, there was no death yet in the Garden of Eden. Only after the fall did death come into the Garden of Eden. Therefore, a predatory animal had nothing to eat. But we won't worry about that right now. That's the comic thing that Twain is going to pick up. But in our tradition of art and literature, we have this idea of the peaceable kingdom of the world before death had come into the world, before death or war or predatory behavior had come into the world. And so this idea that of the peaceable kingdom this is one example of a great painting made of the peaceable kingdom. Now, Adam and Eve refer to the original story here and there, not all at once. Then it's throughout the diary entries that we're going to see Adam and Eve refer to the original story. But as soon as anybody says the word apple, in your mind you go, boing, there we go, an apple reference, or a serpent reference, or even a reference to tree. The elements of what we're dealing with are an apple, a serpent, and a garden with a tree in it. That's what anybody who just hardly even knows the story of Adam and Eve knows there's a serpent and an apple. By the way, Twain was aware that nothing in the Hebrew text says that the fruit was an apple. It just was traditionally attributed that it was an apple. So that's why I think there's kind of a payoff of actually looking at the way the story reads, because these details gave way to so much speculation about what it was. Note down that there's a reference to the apple on page 17 in Eve's point of view, and page 5 in Adam's point of view. We'll come back to that in a minute. But as Eve eats the apple, sin has entered the world, and now all of a sudden, on page 5, Adam is remembering that the animals started fighting each other. On page 5, Adam was absent from Eve as she ate the apple, but somehow he knew something bad had happened because the animals started fighting. Here's some other art about the peaceable kingdom. And these are some of the ideas that had been very common in the interpretation of the story of the fall, that death was not present in Eden. In other words, if they had not eaten the apple, they would have lived forever. Some theologians speculated about that. That the snake had an opportunity because Eve was alone. In other words, her guardian and supervisor and policeman was off duty, meaning she's the weaker one. That is very common, but as I said, it's ambivalent. Adam ate the apple as well because, and different theologians and interpreters gave different answers to the question, why did Adam eat the apple as well? Now, since the curse of God was the labor of childbirth for woman and the labor of man in the fields as their curse for eating the apple, that means labor was absent in Eden. There was no labor yet. Everything they needed was provided, and it was not that anybody had to grow anything. The Sabbath was assumed to be established in Eden as a day of rest because, as you probably remember, the end part of Genesis 1, the 7 days of creation, God rested on the seventh day. Therefore, he blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. And so Sabbath is created as the result or the end of the story of the 7 days. So you're going to see Adam contemplate that, there was already a Sabbath in the first part of Eden before the fall, but why did he need a Sabbath? Because all his days were restful. He had 6 days of rest followed by another day of rest. Another comic idea. That woman was made from the rib of man, no longer connecting rib to breathing, which I think is the essential poetic connection, but just a rib like a spare bone that he didn't need or something. Naming the animals shows dominion. And if you have already read these diary entries, you know who names the animals in Twain's version. Eve does all of it. Yeah, Eve takes over this job, even though the Genesis story clearly says that it was Adam who named the animals.
And Adam says it wasn't necessary. Why did Eve need to name them? They don't come when they're called anyway. So why did
That's
they?
hilarious. Yes. he sees no purpose whatever in a number of things that Eve does. So it's a very comical twist. And, you know, there's always a question whether Adam and Eve were created mortal, but they're certainly mortal once they've fallen. And so the very end that we'll deal with next week, the very end of these diaries is going to turn to who dies first and Eve's thoughts, and then Eve's thoughts about the knowledge of death. Now here we have Niagara Falls Park, which is the Garden of Eden according to Mark Twain. We know that Niagara Falls has existed there for an extremely long time. I hope many of you have seen Niagara Falls in your life. Maybe show of hands. Is Susan there? Or Wally, can you see everybody?
I cannot see everybody.
Okay.
Let me change my view real quickly.
Okay.
I have my hand up.
Okay, hold on. Let me see. Well, there's a lot of people that I see 7 or 8 hands up right now.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Okay.
I see the keels. Somebody's, yep, Wes and Joyce have,
Okay.
Wes, Keel, and Joyce have seen it. Okay.
Okay. All right. So it was even in the 1880s, Niagara Falls was a very, very big deal in the minds of Americans. Everybody who could possibly go and see the falls would go and see it. And they are just absolutely amazing. So even in the late 1880s, in the middle of the time, we know by the 1880s, tourists could walk on walkways that go safely under the falls. You put on this big rubber suit and go experience the spray and all the cold water. You see the whirlpool and the rapids that whirl and suck boats or people under at the base of the falls. So it is definitely a death-defying feat. Now, would anybody care to guess, when would it have been when a human being, like a stunt person, would go over the falls and see if they could make it out alive? Oh, well, I already said in this slide that in 1901, some daredevils had died trying. There was a Jersey jumper named Sam Patch, and there was a woman who jumped over the falls. Here she is. She was 63 years old. Her name was Annie Edison Taylor. And in 1901, she desperately needed money for her old age. She just didn't have any savings. And she thought that if she got into a barrel and went over the falls and survived, she could go around talking about it and make money that way. Now, she sounds completely loony, but you know, there were people who did do amazing stunts and then go around talking about it. So she put a mattress inside this barrel, had herself plugged in there. They put compressed air in there so she'd have enough air to breathe, I guess. And she went over the falls and she did make it out. She was bloody, she was bleeding from her head, but they found her, they hauled her out, and she tried then to write a book about it and go around lecturing about it. That didn't work out too well. She tried, but we're on her side, but she never was able to create a retirement fund out of it. But Teddy Roosevelt would go and hunt elephants, and certainly the circus was already alive and well. P.T. Barnum was going around with circuses. Stunts and performers and trapeze acts and death-defying feats were very popular in the era before, you know, all the sporting events that take up some of that today. Here are some images of the time of Sam Patch, who jumped in 1829. And the one on the left indicates that he jumped without any protection at all. And actually, I'm not sure if he used a barrel or a container or what. And then another image of his jumps. The horse of President Andrew Jackson was named Sam Patch. So somebody jumping the Niagara Falls was a famous feat beginning in the 1830s and very popular right around when Twain is doing this. Here's one image of the Jersey jumper who built a ladder out over the falls so that he could jump. And on stunt day, the chain broke. One of these chains broke here, and it was delayed for 4 hours. People sort of wandered away, so it didn't turn out like he planned. But he did jump and tried again later. But it has to, you know, every time you do it, you have to top yourself. When you're a stunt artist like this, Oh, it goes out in the newspapers that he jumped 80 feet. Then the next one has to be 94 feet and then 110 feet. And the people who are the type of person who get in their car and drive 50 miles to see this thing know all the details. And this Jersey jumper did finally die in one of his jumps. So you'll see Adam pick up the idea that he has to, everything he does, he has to top it next time. Now, Niagara Falls was also one of the most popular spots for honeymoons, and there were already resorts and hotels nearby where people would go to Niagara Falls for their honeymoon. And that's the end of our slideshow. Now, let's just hear some of your, let's just look at the beginning of this the first few pages as we first meet Adam's diary, starting on the first few pages. Twain is going to be introducing.
Linda,
Yeah.
may I suggest that you click the stop share button? You might be
Okay.
able to do it, and then everybody should be able to see more. Let me come in and do it for you real quick.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I see the stop share. I got it. Stop share. Okay. Oh, good, 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 good. Okay.
Can I make this bigger for you?
Oh, yeah, this is great. Okay, thank you. Okay, in the first few pages, Twain is going to introduce some of the comic shticks that we're going to see. What is a shtick? Well, first of all, it's a Yiddish word, but what does it mean?
Carrot and a stick.
Yeah.
That kind of stick.
S-C-H-T-I-C-K, a shtick. It's your gimmick. It's your thing that you're going to go back to all the time.
Okay.
And one of them for Adam is the shtick of wanting to escape. So he wants to escape. The first thing he says when he sees Eve, the very first thing he says, this new creature with the long hair is a good deal in the way. She's in my way. It's always hanging around and following me about. I don't like this. I'm not used to company. I wish it would stay with the other animals. Cloudy today, wind in the east. Think we shall have rain. Where'd I get that word? The new creature uses it. Okay, so Eve is already here in the very beginning. And they've had some experience with each other, but he's just trying to get away from her. She's annoying. He's bothered by her. And then a little bit about the waterfall and some comments about Eve naming the animals like the dodo and saying it just looks like a dodo. And then we're going to, on Wednesday, on page 1, we're going to see him for the first time try to escape. Built me a shelter against the rain, but could not have it to myself in peace. The new creature intruded. When I tried to put it out, it shed water out of the holes it looks with and wiped it away with the back of its paws and made a noise such as some of the other animals make when they are in distress. Eve is crying, and Adam has never seen this before, but he hates it when she cries. So we're going to see a few times from time to time throughout the diaries that she cries and he's got to deal with. He hates it when she cries. I wish it would not talk. It is always talking. That sounds like a cheap fling at the poor creature, a slur, but I do not mean it so. So now he's trying not to be mean, but he just sort of wishes it would go away. I have never heard the human voice before, and any new and strange sound intruding itself here upon the solemn hush of the solemn hush of these dreaming solitudes. What a phrase. Offends my ear and seems a false note. And this new sound is so close to me. It's right at my shoulder, right at my ear, first on one side, then on the other. See, his audience is laughing because it's chatter, chatter, chatter. One ear, first this side and then that side. This is a shtick we still have today, isn't it? Where the man is bothered by the woman's constant chattering, and she's talking all the time, and he just wishes that she would give it up and be quiet more often. And is this human nature? Is it still today that she's a chatterbox and he just wants to sit in his lazy boy chair and have the remote to his control and not be bothered so much? But this is only a starting point for Adam. So this gives us a clue what's going to happen, which is that Eve is going to gradually work her way into his affections, and she's going to win, but she's going to have to do some flirting and pursuing here to get her man interested in her. Then the naming goes on recklessly. He called it the Garden of Eden. Privately, I continued to call it that, but not any longer publicly. The new creature says it all woods and rocks and scenery and therefore has no resemblance to a garden. She says it looks like a park and does not look like anything but a park. Consequently, without consulting me, it has been new named Niagara Falls Park. This is sufficiently high-handed, it seems to me, and already there's a sign up, keep off the grass. So we've gone from the Ur story in the Bible to someplace in Western New York where Eve is turning this into a park where there are signs, keep off the grass, and she's sort of in charge. And then his last line, which will be a laugh line, my life is not as happy as it was with all this going on. Did you notice that that's an iambic pentameter line? All you English students need to know, my life is not as happy as it was. It's a perfect iambic pentameter line, like right out of Shakespeare. And he's thinking, oh boy, but that's not how he's gonna feel at the end. So when you were raising the question about, is Mark Twain just fitting together tidbits here? Or is there a necessary order? I think there is a necessary order in what he's got here. And that's why we're looking at the first 12 pages for today. But for next time, you'll finish, it's 29 pages in all that we're reading here. So we're about halfway through it if we look through the first 12. But it's not Adam's diary and then Eve's diary. It's interspersed. And then time passes so that it does tell a story by going back and forth from his point of view to hers and his and hers and overlap so that you get some of the comic effects of that. Now let's look at Saturday and see how Mark Twain is laying the cards on the table, introducing the different shticks that he's going to use throughout this whole thing. The new creature eats too much fruit. Why is that a laugh line? Fruit means apple, and we're reading the Garden of Eden story, so he's complaining that she's, it's kind of a joke. She's going to be eating the apple pretty soon and causing all kinds of trouble from that. But Adam says we're going to run short, most likely, of fruit. We again. That is its word. Mine too now from hearing it so much. See, he's giving in to her way. He's starting to think of a we, a new pronoun he's never heard before. Good deal of fog this morning. I do not go out in the fog myself. This new creature does. It goes out in all weathers and stumps right in with its muddy feet. Now, who's usually complaining about muddy feet? Usually the women are complaining about muddy feet. But here, Adam is complaining that Eve is coming in, goes out in the fog and comes in with muddy feet and talks. He brings up talking again. It used to be so pleasant and quiet around here. Now we get to Sunday, and Sunday is one of his shticks too. Sabbath observance is very important to most church-going people in Mark Twain's time and before, and after that. Sabbath observance is very important. Okay, so pulled through. This day is getting to be more and more trying. It was selected and set apart last November as a day of rest. I had already 6 of them per week before. This morning found the new creature trying to clod apples out of that forbidden tree. Okay, forbidden tree, now another reference to what's going to go wrong. Let's look at the sentence. I had already 6 of them per week before. What if he'd said, I already had 6 days of rest before? I mean, even every minor bit about the way this is phrased. Can anybody tell me, how would you say this in Dutch or German? Wouldn't you use words that put that already in there just like that? I had already 6 days before. New immigrants are often using odd
I used
word
it before.
order.
It's under
Yeah.
beneath.
Pardon? So I already had 6 days of rest, so there's nothing different. Now, also the cleverness of saying set apart. It was set apart. And weren't we all taught in Sunday school that holy means set apart? That's exactly what it means in the Hebrew word for holy. So those among his audience who really know their stuff are giving Mark Twain a few points for knowing this. He was set apart. Was set apart last November. But of course, until there's labor, there's no rest. I mean, rest doesn't mean anything if you have no labor. So you don't have no labor in Eden, so Sunday doesn't mean anything. It's just a boring day that you have to pull through. That's a comic idea about something as important as Sabbath. Now, on Monday, the new creature says its name is Eve. Eve is announcing that her name is Eve. The Bible says that Adam gave Eve her name. So since naming represents dominance, if you name something, it's a symbol of dominance over that creature. So it makes a little bit of difference whether Eve made up her own name or Eve knows her name, but Adam doesn't know his name or what. And of course, in the original story, as we said, the names Adam and Eve are not used until farther along in Genesis. In the story we just read, it doesn't say Adam and it doesn't say Eve. So he gives in to her again on page 2. The new creature says its name is Eve. That is all right. I have no objections. Says to call it by, it is to call it by when I want it to come. I said it was superfluous then, like she's always there. Why would I need to call her? The word evidently raised me in its respect, and indeed it is a large superfluous. I said it was superfluous. Okay, he used the word superfluous. And Eve respected that. She likes him for his fancy words. It's a large, good word and will bear repetition. It said it is not an it is a she. She is more self-aware than he is. She's aware of time more than he is. Well, he is too, but they're both aware of time. There's nothing more elementally human than being aware of time. Animals are not aware of time in the way that humans are, even by the time the human is 3 years old. This is probably doubtful, yet it is all one to me. What she is were nothing to me if she would go by herself and not talk. So he says it again. Now, he's not just repeating himself. In the way this would be performed or presented on stage, or the way that you read it, every time he says it again, it's comical. Again, it's like a cumulative thing. So let's move ahead and were there any, let's go to page 4, where she's going to tell about her memories of being taken from his rib. She told me she was made out of a rib taken from my body. This is at least doubtful, if not more than that. I have not missed any rib. She is in much trouble now. I mean, that means she's worrying about the buzzard. Says grass does not agree with the buzzard. It is afraid she can't raise it. Thinks it was intended to live on decayed flesh. The buzzard must get along the best it can with what is provided. we cannot overturn the whole scheme to accommodate the buzzard. Then we see Eve looking at herself in the pond in the next section on page 4. She's going to the pond and just looking at her own image in the pond, which is represented in the first image we saw in the PowerPoint of Eve putting her toe into the pond. How many of you know the word narcissistic? That's a word we always use. Narcissus was a Greek god who fell in love with his own image looking in the pond. So in the Greek story. So Eve is, I think, more self-aware and is more self-aware than Adam, just the fact that she uses I all the time and he doesn't. But now if you look through the sequence of stories, maybe as we go through this, Adam uses I more and shows more self-awareness as we go through the reflections of Adam in his diary. So that's something to watch for as you look this over again during the coming week. Now, are there any other questions or comments about these first 12 pages where we hear Adam go over the interchanges with Eve, discuss the story of the fall, and just take the story forward so that we start to see him play the shticks that he has one after another. And it's not exactly random order. Twain is doing something as he's moving you through these particular speeches in this order. Let's look at page 6 on the second half of page 6. Well, right in the middle of page 6, after the ellipsis there. I find she is a good deal of a companion. Okay, he's starting to weaken here. Only 3 pages ago, he thought she was just a bore and she couldn't stand the stream of talking. But now things are changing a little bit. I see I should be lonesome and depressed without her now that I have lost my property. So this is after the fall. Now he's speaking after the fall. Another thing she says, it is ordered that we work for our living hereafter. She will be useful. I will superintend. So now we have heard from Adam after the fall. Let's back up a little bit because the story of the fall is being covered by Adam here. Let's see how he explains it, playing off of the elements that we were discussing earlier. Let's go to the top of 5 where he starts this sequence. She has taken up with a snake now. The other animals are glad, for she was always experimenting with them and bothering them. And I am glad because the snake talks, and this enables me to get rest. Then 3 days later, she says the snake advises her to try the fruit of the tree and says the result will be a great and fine and noble education. I told her there would be another result too. It would introduce death into the world. That was a mistake. It had better to keep the remark to myself, only gave her an idea. She could save the sick buzzard and furnish fresh meat to the despondent lions and tigers. I advised her to keep away from the tree. She said she wouldn't. I foresee trouble. Will emigrate. He's going to escape again. He's just going to escape. And I foresee trouble. It is funny. If you've read all the theological debates about whether in the story of the fall, God foresaw that Adam and Eve would sin, or whether he foreordained that Adam and Eve would sin. Was God the author of evil, or did man have free will? This was a big one a very big one. John Buttry, was this a big one in the discussions of the old theologians about whether there was will involved with the choice of evil or not?
Of course, that's a big issue.
Yep, very big issue. So Eve was concerned about the buzzard, that the buzzards and the animals that were supposed to prey upon others were dying. And now Twain isn't going to be your Sunday school teacher. He's just going to play off of the fact that I foresee trouble, and Adam plans to get out of the way. Now Adam's going to tell the story from his point of view, or what happened when he, in Twain's version, wasn't there when she ate the apple. I have had a variegated time. I escaped last night and rode a horse all night as fast as he could go, hoping to get clear of the park and hide in some other country before the trouble should begin of Eve eating that apple she said she wanted to eat. But it was not to be. About an hour after sunup, as I was riding through a flowery plain where thousands of animals were grazing, slumbering, or playing with each other according to their wont, all of a sudden they broke into a tempest of frightful noises, and in one moment the plain was a frantic commotion, and every beast was destroying its neighbor. I knew what that meant. Eve had eaten that fruit, and death was come into the world. The tigers ate my house, paying no attention when I ordered them to desist, and they would have eaten me if I had stayed, which I didn't, but went away in much haste. I found this place outside the park and was fairly comfortable for a few days, but she has found me out, and has named the place Tonawanda. Tonawanda is an actual name of a suburb around Buffalo. Says it looks like that. In fact, I was not sorry she came, for there are but meager pickings here, and she brought some of those apples. I was obliged to eat them. I was so hungry. Again, huge theological debates about whether Adam ate the apple on purpose or by accident, or because he loved Eve so much that he had to share her fate. Now that he knew that she was going to die, he had to even share that fate with her. There have been all kinds of speculations about what less culpable motive Adam would have had for getting involved himself. But here, I was obliged to eat them. I was so hungry. It was against my principles, but I find that principles have no real force except when one is well fed. You can only really be true to your moral convictions when you are well enough off to do so. Then she came. Now we all know that another result was that they knew that they were naked, so then they begin to know that they need clothing. She came curtained in boughs and bunches of leaves, and when I asked her what she meant by such nonsense and snatched them away and threw them down, she tittered and blushed. She's fallen now, so she knows she's naked. She tittered and blushed. I had never seen a person titter and blush before, but to me it seemed unbecoming and idiotic. She said I would soon know how it was myself. This was correct. Hungry as I was, I laid down the apple half eaten, certainly the best one I ever saw considering the lateness of the season, and arrayed myself in the discarded boughs and branches. So the minute he eats the apple, he grabs the boughs and branches himself and starts clothing himself, and then spoke to her with some severity and ordered her to go and get some more and not make a spectacle of herself. So a minute ago, he thought it was idiotic. And now he's telling her not to make a spectacle of herself, and he's ordering her around. Look at what happened the minute he ate the apple. He became Mr. Boss Man. He wasn't Mr. Boss Man before. And he blamed her. He's going to blame her more and more. And he told her not to make a spectacle of herself. She did it. And after this, we crept down to where the wild beast battle had been and collected some skins. And I made her patch together a couple of suits proper for public occasions. They are uncomfortable, it is true, but stylish. And this is the main point about clothes. Of course, in 1904, people were gaga about snake skin, leopard skin, you know, mink, beaver, all kinds of animal skins. People loved anything made of animal skin. There probably were gowns made of tiger skins. They are uncomfortable, it is true, but stylish, and that is the main point about clothes. Now I find she is a good deal of a companion. Here's the other result of the fall, that Adam now turns to Eve as his companion more than he ever did before. And he feels lonesome when she's not with him. And before, he was just trying to get away. Another thing she says, it is ordered that we work for our living hereafter. She will be useful. I will superintend. So now he's the superintendent of her as part of the fall. Now, how many people have interpreted this as God's will for mankind from the beginning as part of the perfect creation, that man should superintend women and tell her what work she should do and tell her to put on some clothes and not make such a spectacle of herself. Everything's changed, and Twain is correctly pointing out that this shame and blame was a result of the fall and not part of the perfect Garden of Eden as man and woman were created. Okay, now 10 days later, she accuses me of being the cause of the disaster. She says with apparent sincerity and truth that the serpent assured her that the forbidden fruit was not apples, it was chestnuts. So now he's leading off in that direction. Okay, so this will give you maybe a bigger framework from which to continue reading the diary. How many of you have finished this? I've read it through, and now you'll just go back and read through it again and see more of the subtle points and read it again for how it's written and where the comedy is coming from. Did you enjoy reading this? Did you feel like, yes, this is something that somebody in 2021 can read with pleasure and satisfaction, and it's funny and it's fun, and it does play with, you know, man and woman, domestic humor?
I saw a couple thumbs up. So if you would like to unmute yourself, feel free and you can comment further.
I've been
Linda?
confused because
Yes.
my book doesn't follow. I mean, it's what's presented as the one to purchase, but it doesn't follow your pattern at all of pages, etc. So,
Oh, really?
yes. I commented.
Oh, I'm
chat.
sorry about that.
And,
Well,
and
I think
at Reader's World, and it's the same author and it's the illustrations by the same artist, but it doesn't follow the pages or anything. And I'm sitting there, well, this is the same.
One was different a while ago.
Oh,
I
I'm
don't-
so sorry. Is this the cover of what you have?
No,
Oh, my goodness.
I think we have a
Well,
different edition.
it just must be a different edition.
true.
I
I
think
have no
we're
idea.
okay because, and there's
You're reading.
another edition. Okay, well, the sequence and content of the diary entries themselves will be the same. I don't
Yeah.
think there's any, it's not like these are excerpts from something larger. When Twain says excerpts, he's just kidding you. The content of what it says is going to be the same. It's just that
Okay.
the page numbers are going to be a little bit off. But
Okay,
if
well,
you
I'm sitting there,
read it through in order, I'm sorry, because then my
Some of the words.
references.
it's a little confusing, but I mean, I read it and I thought, oh, this is neat. It's not a big book. I can get through it. And but it had them separated. And then you said, yeah, they're separated. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I thought, well, maybe there are two books. One is the Diary of Adam and the other is the Diary of Eve. And I'm sitting there scratching my head and I just thought I'd comment. Thanks.
Okay, well, I hope there was not an error, but I'm pretty sure that we're going to be seeing the same content with doing this. I'll go and check at Reader's World and just kind of see what's up. Now, how many of you really would like to see the images that originally were published with this, just to see what the art was? Because this book was banned in one village in Massachusetts because the nude illustrations were way too much for some people who saw this book and just thought it was terrible. How many of you would like next week to have us put up some examples so you can see how this was done. And okay, we'll make sure we include that. And did any of you try to follow the instructions on the Hal Holbrook thing and see if that all worked smoothly? Do you need more help with how to do that? Okay, that came through.
Okay.
Okay.
Actually, I saw Hal Holbrook doing this, Mark Twain, in Chicago, probably in the late 80s, I think.
Yep.
Anyway, it's really spectacular. He's just
Oh.
excellent. It's
I'm so glad you saw that, Sue. It was all over the place. I saw it too, sometime back in the 70s or 80s, and he just constantly did this. And how he did that for so many years, I don't know, but you know,
he had nothing. He just went up and stood up there for like an hour and spoke in the little intermission, and just amazing presentation.
it really is worth listening to the whole thing. I think if you just want to get into the evening with Mark Twain exactly the way he would present it on the stage, and see what he could do by selecting things. And if the thing with Tom Sawyer painting the fence seems a little bit disjointed, back up and just go through from the beginning, even if you just, it's something where you can watch it for 10 minutes and then come back another time and see it in segments to get the feeling of it. Don't you agree, Sue, that you can take it in bites and find a stopping place and then come back and look at it again, and just during the next week sample different things. In the second half of the program, he will go into Huckleberry Finn and tell an extended scene from Huckleberry Finn. And toward the end, he makes some very touching comments at the very end of the presentation. So if you decide not to watch the whole thing, flip over to the end and just watch the last like 5 minutes or so to see what he says at the very end, because he's summing up Twain's feeling about what his whole artistic life adds up to, and what he says is charming and entertaining. Holbrook just did a terrific job. Yeah, Ben.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
just,
at the end of the book, where he talks about Mark Twain you learn about his marriage, and that is very significant to the story of Adam and Eve.
Yes. Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for spending an hour and a half with us. And
Oh,
giving
I think,
nice-
yes, I think Ben had a comment. Did you have your hand up?
yeah, I did. Just a quick comment, and I'm no expert on Mark Twain and his biography, but what I found fascinating just by reading the book and listening to this discussion today is trying to put it in context of the period. And, you know, not only did Mark Twain have his shtick, but he also knew his audience and the time period in terms of what he was doing. So he's traveling around the country, including Michigan, and made several stops, you know, in resorts, not Niagara Falls, obviously, but in resorts around Michigan, delivering this shtick. And he knew his audience. It was going to other, I'll call them resorts. That's where his stops were, where people were gathering, you know, along the banks of Lake Michigan, including up north. And if you look at many of those places where prayer meetings and people with religious backgrounds were gathering, so he knew the audience and what would be really good material in terms of talking about one of the oldest, you know, relationships of you know, the male female T to T, but also if you look at the religious audience and the underpinnings of all that, I find it kind of fascinating to look at the time period, the location of his talks, and how that had a lot to do with, you know, having the story that he really milked everywhere he went.
Absolutely. And if you do take the time to listen to the whole thing, you will hear quite a long segment, which starts with a comment about what religion means to people. And then he goes through a number of different critiques, and he's not so joking ha anymore. He is taking comedy and irony to another level. And then at one point he has a war prayer that is absolutely a very dark satire, because he paraphrases the Psalms saying, "Oh Lord, smash their children to bits, may they be cut into a bloody mess," and so forth. He creates a war prayer where he's challenging the eagerness for war that he has seen in his lifetime. And even in the early 1900s, around the time of Teddy Roosevelt, it was just a very big deal, and so great that Teddy Roosevelt led these charges. So he's going to question the attitudes toward war. And you're very right that he has a deep perception of moral and spiritual values throughout here, even while he's challenging people to be more thoughtful in some ways.
Right.
Okay, I think we're over our time, so thank you very much today.
Again, we're looking forward
Interesting
to
hearing your
the
comments.
presentation next week. And
Okay, all right, so we'll see the art next week, and we'll take up some of the themes that we picked up today.
Yeah. we did.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
I'll be signed back up again for my meeting later. Okay, Susan. I'll see you guys.
Yes,
You have the humanities meeting at 3.
Right.
yes.
Okay. I'll open the classroom at 2:57.
Okay,
I'm meeting with some people, so I'll be opening the classroom right on time.
okay. Thank you.
Oh, okay, we got an email that humanities meeting was off until 3:15. Is that
Oh,
still?
good. Okay, perfect. Then I
Yeah,
will
yeah.
open at 3:15. Great. See you
Yes,
guys
okay.
later. Thanks.
3:15.
Okay.
All right.